Thanks for turning out this evening on this first cold night. I guess it's going to be that way, or at least it will be by the time we leave. So I'm both a musicologist and an ethnomusicologist, and the difference is that musicology deals with music in a historical context, and ethnomusicology deals with music in the present, cross-culturally. So the two of them sort of intertwine, the past and the present, and the strands that run across culture. Can everyone hear? I can't hear in the back. Okay. So that's what came. That's what's behind this program. That the Roundtable was home to immigrants. Immigrants built this part of Kingston, and for many years, for about up even till the present, the cultures lived side by side, and they mixed to some extent. And the full extent of it came to me when I got involved in the Reher Center, which I always knew was kind of a crossroad institution, the Reher Bakery. Because when I first moved to Kingston in 1971, the Reher Bakery was still open, it was functioning, and I had learned some things about it. And so when I discovered this list, it's called the Sunday List. I'm sorry you can't see it, but it is available online. If you go to sundaylist.org, you will see this thing along with some interactive videos from some of the people on this list. This is, it's called the Sunday List. It's a who's who of Catholic Kingston from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And what would happen is this single product, a roll, galvanized the community, the size of it, the shape of it, the thickness of the crust, the texture of the inside. It was the perfect size to take home after Mass for Sunday breakfast, where they would take this kosher roll and they would put a sausage patty or bacon in it. And people, when you talk to them about the Reher Bakery, they break into a smile. Anyone 50 and older knows about the bakery if they were Catholic and they grew up in the 50s, 60s, whatever. And I mean, even I was standing with Ward Todd, and he said, "So how's your project going?" And I started to describe the Sunday List and the people we're talking to and the stories that we're getting. And he just broke into this big smile and said, "I know, I was there." So it's this kind of thing, and how food served as a crossroad for the community. And so many interesting things are coming out of this. And I have the good fortune of having brought into the project a woman who's getting her PhD now, but she is a foodie. And so she is latching on to this and running with it. And then next Wednesday, she's bringing up some foodies from the city, and I think that Sarah's going to be involved in that too. And we're going to be talking about ways in which food programming can be a part of the bakery going forward. So food is very, plus I love to eat. So, anyway, also my interest in local history here really is a family thing for me. This is the Taylor's Picnic from 1923, and it's many of the Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews who came here late in the 19th and early 20th century came as tailors, and they opened up stores in the Roundtable. And this particular person, Philip Lutson, He was a tailor, and this is his daughter, Sadie. And my first year in Kingston in '71, she was the building rep at the number 8 school, which is where the library is. And she came up behind me and said, the first year you're here, if you don't take off both days for Rosh Hashanah, they won't let you take off both days ever again. So that, and I never told anyone I was Jewish. So it's just this, and so she took us in. One cousin became my podiatrist, another became my dentist, another one, if I needed one, there were lots of lawyers, there were, optometrists, and so that idea of family. And that even though I got here when, the dust was still settling in urban renewal, so I didn't really see Rondout for what it was. I got a sampling of that family that brought people together, that extended family, cousins, where so many people are related to one another across the years. So that's a large part of why I'm involved in the Reher Center, why I'm involved in local history. It's out of just the beauty and the welcoming and everything that I felt from Sadie. So I do like to start with an homage to her. So Jewish immigration, so we're going to talk, I should actually go back to the first slide here a second, I'm sorry. So we're going to talk about 4 cultures. I'm going to take responsibility for the Jewish American culture. We're all going to talk very briefly about our culture group, and then the idea is to come up with how food is important in our culture at some point, and then at the end of the thing we lead you back to the back table where you get to enjoy some of those foods. So I'm going to do the Jewish American. Terry Gittens, who works with me on the Multicultural Festival, she's going to take care of the African American tradition. 2 people I never met, but I'm happy to have the opportunity to, and it's a delight. Wes Lombardi, who was introduced to me by Nina Kosterpak, who I understand was a student of yours. And he's going to talk about Italian Americans, and Sean Waltman, the Irish American tradition. And I put Sean last only because he told me he wasn't going to be here till close to 8. And he showed up at 7. So, okay, so to understand Jews in Kingston and the life they established, just some quick points. The first Jewish immigration goes back to 1654 with the Spanish and Portuguese Jews, the Sephardic Jews. They came, they were chased out, or they fled from Brazil when the Inquisition was started up again down there. They went to New Amsterdam. They were not welcomed by Peter Stuyvesant, but the Dutch West India Company made sure that they had a home, and by 1668 they had established the first Jewish congregation in America. Locally, we have the Gomez Mill House just north of Newburgh. And if you look in some of the old Kingston court records, you'll come across the name of Asher Levy, who came to Kingston quite often for land speculation issues. So the next major influx was in the 1840s with the problems in Germany. Along with the Germans came a lot of the German Jews. And quite a few settled up here. I've just put a few names. Isaac Bernstein I put up because if you go to Dominic's for coffee, that was his store, and I think his name might even still be on the plaque on the corner of the building, but that also appears in a photograph that Jack Matthews shows a lot, where there are these two horses, two horse-drawn carts, and one of the horses is rearing up, and that's right in front of Bernstein's. Jacob and Louis Elting, I also included. I don't know the years, I don't know if anyone here remembers, but they had a big sign that if you stood by the old Dutch church and looked up Wall Street to where Montgomery Ward's used to be on Front Street, Elting's had a big sign up on the top of there. Jacob Forst, the Forst meat packing, the mansion is still here. The factory was torn down for the hotel that never was built, but they were in business till fairly recently. Louis Sampson, I included him because he had a tailor shop down here in the Rondout. His business burned down, and his son built a new business on a new building on the property, 1873. That building still stands there. It was the Sampson Opera House on the upper floors, and the tailor shop was down on the ground floor. And someone told me it was one of the first malls, because not only did they have the tailor shop, but they had a number of other shops for people to rent. That was part of that. So that building was taken over by there were several fires there that reshaped it to some degree, but that building was taken over by the Freeman, and was the Freeman building for a long time, and now is Mariners Harbor. And S. Weiner, Isaac Weiner, his son. Weiner was a distiller and a distributor of spirits, and Isaac was quite a philanthropist and local politician. There was a Weiner Hose company named after him, which I believe is in the building that today is the on O'Reilly Street, the main fire department. I think that's the same building. And a lot of their tombstones, you can see them at the end of Pine Grove in the cemetery there. Then later in the century, starting in 1885, you start to get a lot of immigrants from Eastern Europe. If you ever saw the movie, blocking on the name, Fiddler on the Roof, right? That's the story of what life was like for the Jews in Eastern Europe. And so, especially when they were asked to join the Tsar's army for 25-year stints, that's when a lot of people left their shtetls and came to America here. They were mostly peasants. They came from farms and from small towns. They were not allowed to own property. In Russia, they were limited in what they could do to stay alive, and so they tended to be farmers, peddlers, professions like that. And then we have a more recent population of people that started to move into the area, starting with Kristallnacht. If you don't know what that is, on November 9th, I believe, the night of November 9th, 1938, the Nazis ran through Germany and destroyed everything that was Jewish, all the shops, the synagogues, overnight. And so a lot of Jews had already started to leave, seeing the writing on the wall, and a lot more left then. And then after the war, of course, we have a number of survivors who have moved to the area here. Also, to understand something about the food, you have to understand that when in 79 AD, when the Romans destroyed the Second Temple and expelled the Jews from Israel, they didn't just all end up in the United States. They, some went to Europe, some went to North Africa, some followed what we've decided to call now it's called the Silk Road, the trade routes into Asia, and wherever they went, they put down roots, and they took on a lot of the trappings of those cultures. So there are Iranian Jews, there are Indian Jews, there are Jews from practically every country in the world at that point, and there are a lot of differences in tastes, in clothing, in ritual, while they're still basically Jews and they follow the Torah, the 5 books of Moses from the Old Testament, and most of the customs that are dictated by that each one does it with their own flavor, their own flair, their own customs. So those were the Sephardic. So the two main ones are the Sephardic and the Ashkenazic Jews. The Sephardic Jews were more Mediterranean, and the Ashkenazi were the northern and eastern European Jews, Poland, Russia, France, Germany. So by and large, the Jewish cultures that people in the United States know are mostly the Ashkenazi Jews. So a lot of the customs and everything else, but that's only one part of the Jewish culture. So the food I have chosen to talk about, because I'm looking at food as an entry into the people, the soul of the people, their culture, and what they do. The food I have chosen to talk about are 2 foods that are associated with Shabbat. Shabbat, and I have to say that I'm a stutterer, and Shabbat is very hard for me to say because it begins and it ends with accented syllables. And somehow that combination, Shabbos, is much easier for me because it starts hard and it ends soft. So I can say that. Now Shabbos is Yiddish, or Ashkenazic for Shabbat, which in common parlance is the Sabbath. So they're all the same thing here. And the thing about, in the modern age, we often tend to think about these things as obligations. You're supposed to go to synagogue, you have to pray, and all that kind of stuff. But Shabbat, for people that grow up in the tradition, and I have to confess, I'm not one of them. I grew up in a non-observant household. So gradually I've been learning this. Shabbat is a gift from God. It's the first time, according to the Jewish lore and teaching, that really there was a day of rest. That before then you worked 7 days a week, non-stop. So what Shabbat did, and it was prescribed to the Jews in the 10 Commandments, right? What they did is it made you stop. And in stopping, you have a chance to reflect, to be with your family, to just breathe, to see how your week is going, to think about how you might want next week to go, and then you start again with that chance to go. So it really is a gift, and that time is seen as a gift and a joy. And the other thing is, and as part of that, at Friday night at the service, you always welcome Shabbos as the Shabbos bride. God comes in as the Shabbos bride. And actually there's someone sitting in the audience here who I really have to acknowledge, because I joined the ritual committee at Woodstock Jewish Congregation, knowing absolutely nothing about Judaism, and I served with an incredible group of people. At a time I was studying ethnomusicology, So it was like participant observation. I was sitting among Jews, creating a new synagogue, learning from them what the customs and the rituals were and all of this. And so Judy is here, and I'm looking over at her a lot, and that is a real gift to me. So anyway, so for those of you who don't know, Jewish holidays, festivals start at sundown and go to sundown of the next day. I got this off of the web. God help me if it's wrong. But Genesis chapter 1, and there was evening and there was morning, and there was morning one day, and that's how we sort of got to that interpretation. And so for Shabbos, what happens is late in the afternoon, everyone quits work. If you go to Israel, you see everyone rushing home. They stop at the shuk to get a few minute last things. That's the open markets, and they run home and they prepare for Shabbos, and you get into your best clothes and, you know, the best tablecloths. So everything is set out. It's supposed to be a welcoming of the Shabbos pride. You know, it's that whole kind of a festival. So the two foods I'm going to talk about. One is challah, and so this is where, you know, it's very hard to get a straight answer, because there were so many, when you go to the back when, there were so many different stories and so many different interpretations and so many different things. What does challah, where does that word come from? And so there's a lot of story about how back in when there was still a temple, which was in Jerusalem, and there was a high priest, that it was whenever you made bread, you were supposed to set aside a portion and give it as an offering to the high priest, and that was called the challah, or some variant of that word, and so that comes through, and there is a tradition still among very religious people that whenever they bake bread, they take a little bit off. There's even a prescription 1/24 or less. It's often just a little nurdle, and they put it in the bottom of the oven, not in the pan, just so that it gets burned from that. So challah also symbolizes the manna that fell from heaven during the Exodus from Egypt. So it's a special bread. It's sweeter. It's richer. It's and that's because it's closer to what, you know, to doing honor to God for the manna that came from heaven. And this I also didn't know till I hit the internet, though I'm sure that I found out about it at some point. When you say the blessing, you hold two pieces of challah together, and that's because the Jews, when they were wandering, did not get manna on Shabbat, and so they got a double ration the day before. So you hold the two loaves, and that commemorates that. And the other dish I'm going to share is cholent. Okay, so you can't. This is even with this one. There's a little bit of a difference when you go through and you read it. First of all, several things about cholent. If you start to look for recipes, you quickly get into the idea that every culture has its own version, every Jewish culture. So there are Iranian cholents, there are African cholents. This is an Ashkenazi one, the one I prepared for you this evening. But on the back of the recipe for the Ashkenazi version, is a version called dafina, which is from Morocco. And they're all basically beans and meat, potatoes that are stewed, and a lot of the difference has to do with if there's, like I think the dafina has a lot of chickpeas in it, because that's a local thing versus the kinds of beans that the Ashkenazis use. And the main thing about cholent is Jews are not allowed to light a flame or do anything to cause, a flame or a heating element to light up or anything like that. So what they would do is before Shabbos started, they would mix everything in a pot. They would pre-cook it for a short period of time, and then they would leave it cooking on a very slow, low heat until lunchtime Saturday. So it would cook like 10, 12 hours kind of a thing, and then you would eat it. And lunch was always a big deal, because that's when people would sit around the table. It was between the morning services and the afternoon and evening services. So you'd sit around. I think the Lubavitch have a fabrangen, they call it, where you sit around the table and you talk, you study Torah together, sing. So that's that. Not being able to do that. That's why this dish was invented. And then I said, and then even with no one knows where the name comes from. And I did read someplace that I could not find again, that it may have even had its origins in medieval France, where there was a stew made in this region of France where there was a lot of Jews at the time. And when they were expelled and went to Germany, they brought this slow-cooked stew with them, and that morphed into cholent. But I can't say that's true or not. So, but that's, I'm going to finish my part and turn it over to the next person. That was Terry.
Question?
Questions? Yeah.
Question. Do you know anything about how they may have put some of the cholent in some of the bakers' ovens?
Oh, right, exactly. That's a good point. Thanks. That's my plant. So yeah, no, it's that was the tradition. That was one of the places where people would slow cook. It would be in bakers' ovens. In Europe, that was a tradition. So the bakers, at the end of the day, preparation for Shabbos, would bank the coals, and people would bring their pots in, and they'd put them inside the ovens, and then they'd pick them up at lunchtime on the way home from shul. I did hear from one person that happened at Jaime's place too, at the Reher bakery, but I've not, it's one person, and I have to hear that from a few more before I'll say that was real or not.
I just wanted to add one thing. Oftentimes when you buy a challah in a supermarket, for example, they'll say challah bread. So that's like saying bread. And everybody says it. So now if you see challah bread, you know that it's redundant.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Any other questions before we move on to the next person?
Did you find the recipe for the rolls in the bakery?
Everyone asks that question, and I think if you go on that website I told you, rehercenter.org, I forget her first name, Barbara Trimper, I want to say. I don't know if Barbara's her first name or not. Said that she asked for the recipe, and they told her that they're never going to give that away. And I've heard that from several people. The only thing we found so far about what they baked was the recipe for rye bread, and the unit of measure was shovelfuls.
But you have the shovel, right?
Yeah.
We have the shovel, yes. So right now the bakery is in the process of being taken apart, fixed over and reinterpreted, so you won't be able to get inside for a year or two, but I hope you all stop by and take a look at what happens when it's open, because it's a fascinating story. Anyway, Terry Gittens is a good friend of mine. We've worked together on a number of projects. She single-handedly has really kept Black History Month alive in Ulster County for how many years now?
31.
Oh,
31 years, yes. Yeah. So I would like to turn the floor over to her now.
Good evening. As Geoffrey said, I've been humbly trying to keep Black history alive for the last 31 years. It became a labor of love as a single mom, and the only thing that I did for myself, it started out as a hobby, but then I realized that it had more validity than just having a passing hobby. It became part of my life. And I started a program called Cultural Awareness Restores Equality. And through the years, I've given lectures and trainings and workshops on tolerance and diversity because of it. And one of the things we cover is the interactives that all people, no matter what nationality and race, it's cross-cultural. And there are certain things that we all do, and food is the first interactive. We may not know each other's culture, but we will eat each other's food. No, it is. And it's one of those things that there are times that when we are emotionally in need, and that goes forward, this, the left side, excuse us please.
Right side forward, left side back.
Right side forward, okay, all right, very good. All right, we'll get this technology together. One of the things that I realized as I was doing my program through the years is that there was a need for us to know about each other more than just in passing, or more than just knowing about each other when there was a crisis or a tragedy. So that's why I started my program, Cultural Awareness Restores Equality. And we've been going strong for, like I said, 31 years, doing Black History programs. Now, Geoffrey has asked me to share some of the things of the Black experience here in Ulster County, in Kingston area. There was slavery here, in case anybody wants to dispute that. There was slavery here.
And there was.
Okay, very good. Sadly, the slaves in the North were a tad bit different than the slavery system in the South. The slavery system in the South, after the sun went down, the slaves were relatively independent and free, as much as they could be. They could interact with one another. Whereas the slaves in the north of the country were pretty much in close proximity to the slave master and his family, and had a tendency to be isolated from other slaves and other properties. So they developed a different mindset. Food, as we're going to discuss, is one of the things that created comfort for them. The food that I'm going to talk about at the end will be sweet potato pie. And I brought a couple of them back there for us. So, first and foremost, my house is your house. My family on my mother's side goes back here for 7 generations. My great-grandmother was named Daisy Vanderzee, and she was the daughter of Jenny Cantine, and if anybody knows anything about Saugerties, which was once a Hurley, part of Hurley, they were very wealthy people and they had a lot of property. And history, we're really digging it up, and it shows that my great-great-grandmother was a young child when slavery was abolished. So, my great-grandmother was with me until I was, 43, 44. So I have a rich history of the area. The picture that we're seeing here is one of the major families in Kingston. This is the Washington family. This family was traditionally caretakers and musicians, and they had a very good input into the development of the Black community here in Kingston. I don't know if anybody knows of the Washington family, but they're very active, proactive, and they've got a lot of pride because they started from the ground up here in this area. So that is the family. I can't tell you all the folks that are in there because I just can't tell you. But this is the Washington family. Okay. Now, one of the interesting things about the Black experience in Ulster and Kingston is the migration that happened. After slavery, you had a group of people, the Africans, that were displaced. They were unsocialized. They were skilled to some degree working on farms, but when they were given freedom, socially they were unskilled. They were nomads for a moment. The only thing that kept them kind of cohesive was the fact that in the South, they did have that sense of camaraderie. In the North, it was a little different. But as time went on, the Blacks from the South migrated to the North because of economics. Because the need for farm workers wasn't as great because they weren't working the plantations anymore. So they decided that the North was really bustling and really becoming a place where they could possibly have a better life. So the migration was great. I would say you can see by the map here that the migration from Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, I think I have a map later on, but it kind of shows you where they migrated from in the different states on the map here. And the highest concentration from my studies has been in DC, New York, and Philadelphia from the city, from the South. And, as you can see, some of their travels took them quite far as San Francisco and Oakland, California, and Seattle, Washington. So that's why also today we still have a great population of African Americans in that area, because it started when the Great Migration happened. All right, what we got here? All right, by decade, this really started taking off in the early 20th century, which 1910s and the 20s. It really started to escalate because the pinch of being in the South really got to a place where they wanted to improve and migrate someplace where they could feel they could live. Also, the Jim Crow laws were becoming more and more stringent during that time. And I don't know if anyone knows about the Jim Crow laws, but they were a group of laws that African Americans could not travel without a permission, without a piece of paper stating that they could. They could not be out after a certain time. There was limits on how they moved around. Certainly they couldn't socialize. The segregation was at its highest point then. And so a lot of the times during this migration, it was believed that the North was a better place. They didn't have to worry and look over their shoulder every 5 minutes. But racism and bigotry can be a covert thing. And even though they moved to the North, they're still were facing a different monster in racism. And they did experience some things, but we'll finish that down the road. All right, here we can see the progression. And in the 40s, is a big jump. That's because industry-wise, here in the Ulster County area, there was a big development of your brickyards and your shed business and fishing. Yes, someone said fishing. Yes, that became a very big industry. And it was something that a lot of the Africans, even though they might have been raised in the United States or been members of families, that was something that was intrinsic in them. Fishing, handling fish and knowing what to do really came natural. So being on the shad fields, that was something that they could do. The brickyards were another place. That was a place where it was hard work, but they were able to accommodate the demand for, the business. So they came here, they're strong, in spite of what was happening to them. So in the 50s, it kind of dropped off a little bit, in the 60s even more so. For some of the families in Kingston and the area, the 60s brought IBM. And, prior to that, it was the brickyards, it was the shad fields, some masonry. But by the 60s, that's why I kind of dropped off, because things got a little better in the South. Not very much, but just enough to keep people from traveling so much. And then education started increasing. Some of the Jim Crow laws were kind of waning. And then during the 60s, we did have the civil rights movement. So it kind of lightened things a little bit in the South. So that movement wasn't as intense. They figured, well, we can stay home and make a difference. We don't have to leave the territory. So that's why you see this major drop in the 60s. All right. So we're going to get a bit of the first wave, which is between 1910 and 1940. And as I said, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Washington were your highest populations during that time. And some great accomplishments were done, but, as we know history, sometimes it's not revealed. That's why cultural awareness restores equality. So, and you can see the different spots throughout the population area and the difference between the areas. I thought this was very interesting because it kind of gave you a handle on what was going on. This is a few things just to remind us that some things needed to change. This is the scale of the percentage of African Americans in the South, and it's another scale of the progression and how it comes right on up into the new millennium, which is 2010. And in the 90s, there was a bit of a spike, simply because property was easily obtainable in the South. You could build a home easier, and it didn't cost as much. So those people who were progressive, blacks, they said, well, let's go down south. They had roots in the South to begin with, because grandma and grandpa had come up, and now some of the younger ones were college educated, and they wanted to live a life that was a little simpler and easier, and didn't want to wait until they were in their 60s to build a home or have a home. So going down south really made it a little easier. So that's why you see that spike in the 70s and through a good 20 some odd years, because life was a little better. I remember some family members saying that they moved in this complex and they heard someone's talking. They said it didn't sound like a Southern person, so they peeped out. It was a building complex, and it was somebody from their own neighborhood that had moved down there, because that's how much people were moving from the north going south. And the bottom line is that they wanted to live life. They wanted to live the American dream, and sometimes you have to move in order to do that. So we were always willing to do just that. So that's another part here. And it's kind of, by 2010, you still had some people moving. I do have friends that keep moving and find it very much more easier lifestyle. But I'm a northern girl, so I'm not going anywhere. All right, what we got next? Old George Pete. This gentleman is a very interesting individual because he was the son of a slave woman, but he was free when he was born. And he lived in the Hurley area, over by the Hurley Mountain Road area. Anybody familiar with that area? Okay. All right. He worked for many people, and then at one point, he worked for a restaurant, and the clams were very popular at that time. And they had a lot of clam bakes and all sorts of things going on. So he was very enterprising, and he would go and dig for clams, and he became known as the Clam Man. And he was able to buy property. He was a self-made man. He bought some property from Mr. Winecoop, Cornelius P. Winecoop. And he sired 12 children, but only 5 survived. The Newkirk family is still in this area, although they have moved to different parts of the southern part of the county in Modena and Plattekill. But the name is still around. There's a nice church over there, and I believe that they're the great-great-grandchildren of Mr. Newkirk. So what was interesting about him is that he needed to make sure that he could meet the demand for the clams, so he backed up a stream on his property and made a clam bed for himself. So this way, when he was able to harvest these things, he was able to meet the needs, and he became quite wealthy for that time. I think his property was something like $1,100, and if people were only making $3 a month, he seemed like he was quite well off. But he was also considered to be a self-made businessman. And the one thing that I found interesting, along with everything else, was the fact that he was the first black person in the state of New York to have the right to vote. This man right here, George P. Newkirk. So that's why we kind of put him in here and made it interesting, because you don't know these things, and you live in a territory and you don't know, what's going on and what has happened, so you need to share these things. All right. The churches, the black churches. As a minister, I really enjoy this part of it because you can kind of see, this is the Riverview Baptist Church. This was one of their beautifully stained glass windows that was depicting one of the brickyards that many of the blacks that came from the South worked at. That piece of property, I think there's a remnant of that building there. I don't know if it's being restored or not, but I think it's a remnant of that building. There's been talk that they're going to refurbish a lot of the buildings down on the Roundtable. I think our maritime lady might be able to help us with that. But it's important that we keep these things intact, because that's our history. Whether we were born here and have family here like I do for 7 generations, or we're just coming, the land still holds the heart of the people. I really believe that. So, once we know what has gone on in the land, we can then, glean from that and move forward and progress. I really believe that. So, the black churches, the church in general for the African was a very important intrinsic part of their existence, because it was the only place that they could really express their feelings. Normally they had to swallow whatever hurt, pain, or experience they had. It wasn't something that they were allowed to do. They had to really ingest it all. But in the church setting, there was a sense of freedom. And in that freedom became a place of solace for them. This particular church is not the oldest church. The oldest church in the city of Kingston is the AME Zion Church on Franklin Street. An American African Methodist. That's what that's called. That's what it means. So the early Africans built the church, and it's sad because, our young people don't know the history, and the church was a place, a meeting place. It was a place to share your feelings. It was a place that you could bring your problems to. For the African in the United States, it was one of the few places that they were not disturbed. And as a human being, you need some place, some kind of solace somewhere. It doesn't come easy. But if you find that one place, that's why comfort food is so important, because it does something that no doctor can do. So Riverview was founded by a couple of families, and if I can find my notes, let me see. Riverview was founded by the Brown family and the Washington family. Many of you might know the names and people. There were two distinct early families in Kingston. That was the Fitzgeralds, and they lived uptown. They were horsemen, they were coachmen, they were entrepreneurs, so to speak. The Browns, who lived downtown, that were part of the Washington and Brown, where this church was. Actually, this church was a offspring of a smaller church. And they pulled their money together and they worked hard. They were domestics. They were caretakers. So you had these two different groups of African American people in Kingston, and they had very, very large families. I think the Washingtons had that one picture. I don't know how many people was in that picture, but the Fitzgeralds, they just had like 18 kids, I think. It was like, how do you do that? But, it was important that, I know it just came on. It was important that the families work together, because in any culture, you usually rely on your families to make a business, to keep the home going, and it's important. So Riverview has survived a fire. It was vandalized a couple of years ago, and the church members of the families that were still the original ones, they pulled themselves together and they developed a beautiful sanctuary down there. It's gorgeous. And they saved the small church and they used that as their fellowship hall. So family in church groups is very, very important, just as it is in a synagogue or, another place of worship. It's important. I think we've gotten away from this, and that's the sad part. I think there's so many people that feel like there's no place where they can feel a connection. And so they're left unto themselves. And when you're left into yourself and you have no place for solace, you short circuit and you do things that are unthinkable. And it's important that each one of us had that place of solace. I think that the issues that are going on today, every other day, every other week, we're hearing something horrible happening. So if we can all find that place for ourselves and teach the young people how to find that place of solace and security, maybe we won't have to see so many bad things in the papers. That's the minister of me coming out. I don't mean to be preaching now. All right. Okay, so that's the Fitzgerald family, and like I said, they produced, let's see now, I'm related to them. So my cousin became a PA, physician's assistant, working at the White House. She worked under many administrations before she retired. There's many doctors that came out of this group. There's a couple lawyers. Let me see, what's his name? Kevin Bryant. Anybody know that name? Okay, he's part of this. So, good family structure is very important. And one of the things that really kept families together was the food. So, food time, this picture, brickyard. It's a little out of sync. That man in the circle is my grandfather. He worked on the brickyard. His family came from Tarrytown and then prior to Tarrytown someplace else. And he worked on the brickyards. Brickyard work wasn't easy, but it made a good life for folks. Yes, ma'am?
So is this picture of them at the brickyard?
Yes,
And so they're all kids?
Their children.
yes. Children were employed quite a bit back in those days. Even on the D&H Canal, I did some research on that, and they used to use children to pull the donkeys and the mules. And then somewhere along the line, they realized, nah, this is not a good idea, so they started giving those jobs to, adults. But, yeah, kids were, and a lot of these kids were runaways and came to work and they didn't have the laws like we do now. So the children, if they're willing to work, they put them to work. So that's what that's about.
Do you know what he did at the brickyards?
No, I don't. It's like he passed away and
Okay.
he and my grandmother had separated, so I can't tell you what he did. But I know that he made a good, lucrative lifestyle. And up until the time I must have been around 8 or 9, he lived well. He was a minister, and he was one of the founders of the New Progressive Baptist Church. So, working the brick job, paid off in the end. So, let's see what else we got here. The shad fields. Fishing camps. Like I had mentioned earlier, it was a way for blacks to be able to have a lucrative job, And it was one of the few places in this area that would accept blacks to work. Yeah, shad fishing was very popular then. You mentioned the word shad as a fish, and people say, "What is that?" They have no idea. Yeah.
It's a herring.
There's the old shadfish right there. There's some more. It was a lucrative business, it really was. And they're cooking the shad there. They're on planks and smoking them. Yeah. I venture to say if there was a lot of shad around, that would be a delicacy. We'd pay an arm and a leg to get it. But back then it was plentiful, so. And this is the creek area where, there it is. This is the creek area where a lot of the shad businesses were along through here. Yeah, right along here. So, that is that. Rondown, yes. Okaki, all right. Okay, now, the food that I'm covering is sweet potato pie. Sweet potato pie is a root plant food. And traditionally, the slaves were given food that was given to the animals. Let's face it, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. They got the scraps and things that they gave to the animals. But because slaves were not animals and they were human beings, they used the food and they perfected the food and they made it. It was a staple for them. Instead of, it's funny because we know now that your root foods are the best foods for you to eat. So, in retrospect, instead of making them weaker and to die off or whatever, the food that they were given made the slaves stronger. And sweet potato, because sugar wasn't plentiful for them, the sweetness in the potato just became a staple at any of, you couldn't have a good soul food meal without having a nice sweet potato pie. You could not call yourself a black cook if you didn't have a nice big sweet potato pie. And for me, I eat it like candy sometimes, because what I will do, I'll boil it, and then I'll take some of the water off of it, and I'll peel it, and I'll mash it up, and I'll put it in the fridge. And I don't have to put any sugar or cinnamon or anything on it. And when I was dieting, that's when I was dieting. Who left? Who left? I would use that as something for sweet, rather than candy. And the pounds came off. I went down to a small size. But that's beside the point. I'm not telling you anymore. I fell off the wagon. Anyway, but having sweet potato pie and peach cobbler and banana pudding, these were the comfort foods for the African Americans through the years. They took foods that were not normally, utilized by the people that they were, working for, and they made something beautiful out of it. And it's one of the best things you can have. And if you warm it up, I tell you, it will warm your heart. Thank you so much.
One of the things that I love about the history in this region is that growing up in Manhattan, if you want to look into culture and trends and everything else, you have to use census data and tables and everything else. But up here in Kingston, it's all like interviewing people who have been around for generations, and you get family stories and sagas, and it's just a wonderful act. So thank you, Terry. Now, when my grandmother first got married, she used to tell me, and my love of cooking goes back to the fact that she took, my mother divorced when I was 5, and we moved to New York, and my grandmother took us in, and my grandmother was the family cook for family parties, and I was her official chopper. So I would sit there with the chopping bowl and chop away, and she would throw in handfuls of this and handfuls of that. And so for me, food preparation is a way to get back in touch with family and that relationship. She told me that when she got married, she could not cook at all. And her neighbor, Mrs. Rosa, took her in and showed her how to cook. How Mrs. Rosa could have taught her how to make the gefilte fish stuff, I don't know. But there's always been, I think, a close bond between Italian Americans and Jews. They've lived close to one another throughout the years, and I think their love of food, their love of family, in so many ways they are alike. And so I'm very happy to meet Les, and looking forward to hearing what he has to say. So thank you, Les, and welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. I have a little different story. I'm an immigrant from Poughkeepsie. But anyway, I made up for it though because I summered in Kingston. So my mother was in Albany. So besides teaching Nina, she's also my cousin and the Albanys. And I came every summer to the Albanys and from the Manfros. And my Uncle Charlie's brother had a barbershop right down here by the bakery. So on Sundays, when we came to Kingston in summer, there were a couple of advantages. One, you could go to the bakery after church, and the Albanys went to St. Joseph's uptown. We'd go to the bakery, and then another great place was Kingston Point, we would spend Sunday vacationing on Kingston Point. And unfortunately, the point's not what it used to be, but if any of you were from Kingston when you were young, you can realize what a great Sunday afternoon that was. So I didn't bring my laptop or my iPad, I have my phone, but I'm gonna start off by doing like an old, what we used to call a show and tell. And what I did bring though is back in October 1953, there was a family in Poughkeepsie called the LaFalge family, and some of you might know them because of the music abilities that they had spread throughout Dutchess and Ulster County. But I became famous then because people were showing family portraits. This is my kindergarten class in 1953. And I was very fortunate because my grandparents more or less raised me, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But make a long story short, I started to go out with my now wife, and I said, we're going to go to a reunion. And I taught at Coleman for 4 years, so I would go to a lot of class reunions there. And my wife said, well, what year is it? I said, no, it's not one of the Coleman reunions, it's my kindergarten reunion. And she said, kindergarten reunion? Nobody has kindergarten reunions, you know? And I said, yeah, we're going to go to our kindergarten reunion. And one of my fourth grade teachers, Mrs. Legalbo, was at it. So of course she called me Lester, and we had a great reunion. But I'm going to pass this around, be a little careful with it, but as you look through this magazine, and I did, the memories just flushed back, but it talks about an Italian-American family in Poughkeepsie. Our parish was Mark Carmel, downtown. I know most of you know where that is. Nick Benny's was the restaurant there. But at our reunion, each of us got up and said a few words about being in kindergarten. So when you look at this picture, you could, number one, try to find me. Definitely had more hair. But number two, there was this guy, and I don't know if any of you remember downtown Poughkeepsie, was a Senza's delicatessen. So anyway, this guy gets up and he says, I have to confess I've been going to therapy for 40 years. So he said, Sal, why? He said, because only my ankles and my shoes are in the picture because I'm behind the flag. So that's a good enough reason. So we redid the picture, and needless to say, he was really happy, and hopefully he's out of therapy. And he actually volunteers down the FDR Museum, and he sneaks me in all the time to get some good historical tours. But take a look at this, and then the funny thing is, I'm looking at it, before I came down, and when you look at the ads, you really get a laugh. And there's a big ad in here for Chef Boyardee ravioli when it first came out, okay, in a can. God forbid, that would be the most anti-Italian thing ever, to put pasta in a can. So take a look at this, and then I'll give you a little background, and if you find me, there's a prize for you. It's an all-expense-paid vacation someplace. But growing up in Poughkeepsie, and summering in Kingston was a real experience for me. My grandparents owned the Bronx Fruit Market, and you know where it is. It's on the corner of Main Street and South Perry, actually North Perry. And my grandmother and grandfather came to this country from Italy, and we actually went back years ago and found the church where they got married. So their English was meds. I would say my grandmother's was even less than meds. So when I went to kindergarten and we spoke English and Italian, the one benefit of it, and my wife still thinks this is a great thing, I could count, okay? And back years ago when we went to Italy, you did a lira, and there was 600 lira and a dollar, and you had to count forever. But the Bronx Fruit Market was a unique place. In the basement was the wine. Every fall we made wine. My father worked in construction for years, but on the weekends he would go down to the real Bronx Fruit Market and bring grapes up. And what happens is the Italians from Poughkeepsie, Highland, Kingston, all of Dutchess and Ulster County would come to the Bronx Fruit Market to get their grapes on Saturday, and then it spilled over to Sunday, which was sacrilegious, so they could go home and make their wine. And my father used to make 2 or 3 runs on Friday and Saturday to get the grapes up here, which I thought was really fascinating. The other thing that I thought was really fascinating is my grandmother made sausage the first and third Saturday of the month, but you had to order at least a week in advance. And I grew up stuffing sausage cases, okay, for years. And on a good day, on a good Saturday, they would make 300 to 400 pounds of sausage. And I learned a lot about sausage making, you know, when I was a young kid. But to this day, and you can get it at Adams, my grandmother used to put Parmesan cheese and extra parsley in her sausage. And the cheese and the parsley kind of, when you cooked it, really gave the sausage some extra flavor. So that was what was going on. And the other thing that I really liked about it is that besides the grapes and the sausage, we were in a multicultural Afro-American community. Perry Street was really Afro-American. And my grandparents tried to make all the Afro-Americans Italian. So every time they would come in, and it was a unique thing. And one of my grandparents' great things was the sense of family. So whenever my grandmother cooked, whether it be 300 pounds of sausage or, you know, like 20 pounds of pasta, everybody, you know, just kind of showed up and she fed them. And then one of their fears was across the street, an A&P came in. And you know, that was the first of the chain stores, much like we don't like Walmart and CVS and all of those. We thought that was going to be the end of the business. But one of the things I realized as a youngster was that sense of family kept that store going. And my grandparents gave credit. They had a big book, and everybody came in and put their name down and what they took. And at the end of the month, or whenever payday was, everybody squared up. And when things got tough for some families, my grandfather would say, okay, no cigarettes, soda, beer, just food. And I thought that was really remarkable. And I don't think my grandparents ever got stuck, as we said. We didn't have credit cards then, but that book, that would be something really I would like to find that was amazing. Much like Kingston, we had urban renewal. And I got the Lost Roundout again. And I remember coming down here and seeing all the big X's on the buildings. And my Uncle Charlie worked at Myron's in the Brickyard. And you know, just coming on a Sunday and just, you know, week to week, not knowing which building is going to disappear. And the same thing happened in Poughkeepsie, all the way up, pretty much from the river, all the way up to what's now Market Street. They kind of took everything away, including the Bronx Food Market. But I learned a lot in that store, and I learned a lot about family. I learned how to cook. My grandmother, she was an excellent cook, and one of the things that was a staple, and besides the sausage, was pasta. So we're going to talk a little bit about pasta tonight and what it means to me. I think, like your sweet potato pie, which I love, and some of the Jewish food, and I actually went to high school in New York City and had a lot of that. You know, I think our cultures are defined by what we eat and how we eat, okay? And I think the reason Chef Boyardee didn't fit in with our culture, okay, I could see if my grandmother ever saw a microwave oven, she would definitely have the big one. But anyway, a little bit about pasta, okay? So what I want to tell you is that, I didn't bring it, but it's made back there, but the Chinese take credit for pasta. Marco Polo, 1100, you know, he's the one who first started the lo mein noodles. Like a good Italian, I couldn't really believe that. All right, so I have a lot of, when I worked, a lot of Chinese friends, and they would always brag about Marco Polo and the noodles and all of that. So I went back and I found out that the Etruscans in 500 BC actually made pasta. And that's the region in Italy called Tuscany. So we were way before that, okay, way before the Chinese. And they made it out of corn flour. And then the next big thing is in 1519. And everybody talks about Italians and having their pasta and their sauce. Some people call it sauce, some people call it gravy, okay, depending where you're from. It was sauce in our family. But Cortez actually brought tomatoes to Italy in 1519. So there was no pasta, sauce, or gravy until 1519, which everybody kind of like never really thought about. But when you go to Italy, you'll see everybody has, and I think about Glasgow, up by Saugerties, everybody has tomatoes in their backyard. So you went out, picked the tomatoes, and made the pasta sauce. Thomas Jefferson lived in Monticello, okay? Great Italian friend. And they're made popular, the Thomas Jefferson pasta in the United States. Anybody have any idea how many shapes of pasta there are? No, no idea.
1,000.
How many, 1,000? That's a good guess. Good guess. 600. Okay, so there's 600 different shapes, and now we go out and we buy our pasta machines, and they give you this book, and you go through, and you can make, you know, all these different things. So the top 3. Anybody want to guess at those? The top. My wife got 2 out of 3. Spaghetti's number 1.
Ziti.
No.
Elbow.
Is number 2.
And
Okay. So number 3 is this one threw me.
Elbow?
No, that goes in our soup. You know, rotini. Do you know what rotini is? The bed springs. In our family, they were the bed. That was number 3. But then there's also like, you know, when you look at the 600 of them and you start to go down the list, you have things like capellini or acchetti, you know, the lasagna, which is a derivative, linguine, ziti, and it goes on and on and on. But when you go to Italy, and I spent a lot of time researching this, okay? We're very fortunate, we've been going to Tuscany, Italy for the last 21 years. Fortunately, my wife has a friend that has a house there that lets us stay there, and it's become almost like our second home. So we're about 12 miles from Montepulciano. And so I'm going to tell you a little story here, because in Italy, you really need the utensils to make good pasta. So my mother and my grandmother taught me a few things about cooking. I will tell you, my wife's not here to defend herself. My wife doesn't cook too much. She makes a stew, okay? She does make a good lasagna, and she makes some good soups. But number 1 rule of pasta, don't overcook it. God forbid you overcook the pasta. You want it al dente, okay? And the second thing is never serve it cold. So we're in trouble here. I tried to get a couple people, Reginato, Stephanie and Kevin at Reginato's. Kevin makes one of the top 5 gnocchi in the country. And he makes sweet potato gnocchi with a brown and butter sauce. Yeah. So I thought I had Kevin all lined up, and then he calls me up this morning and he goes, Les, I just can't do it. It's going to be cold. It's going to get mushy. And I'm going, Kevin, we're just going to taste it. We're not going to have a dinner on it. So he says, you got to get somebody closer. So I got Dave Amato over at Old Savannah to make it today, and I just brought it over. But that's number 1. Don't serve it cold. Okay, don't overcook it. You don't want the mush. The second one is, this is very important, okay? Don't stir it with a metal spoon. You need to have the wooden spoon, which comes in useful for a lot of other things. My grandmother used to do this. You know how the Italians do this with the finger? Okay, my grandmother used to do this with, so don't stir it unless you have a wooden spoon. And you can go out and get those anywhere, and then they try to sell you 3 at a time. The other thing that I always found interesting is never rinse your spaghetti. Now, a lot of people take it out of the pot, put it in the strainer, and say, oh, we'll run some water out of it. That's a no-no. My grandmother would come with a spoon and beat you up. Because that takes a lot of the nutrients out of it. And it also takes, I don't know how to explain this to you, but there's like a film on the pasta. And when you put it under water like that, you're going to rinse that away. So as everyone agrees, don't rinse the pasta, okay? And then, this is something, and I don't know how many of you do it this way. I even go to restaurants where they don't agree with this, but don't just put the sauce or the gravy on top. You have to cook it in with it so that you get the real flavor into the pasta and it absorbs this. So years and years of research have given me these don'ts. So over in Montepulciano, which is like my home away from home, there's a guy called Cesare, he's a Ramen, and he makes copper pots, and he's amazing. I've been visiting him for 21 years. This year, I finally sprung at how to make me a pot, okay? $240, but when you look at this, and I brought I brought a book over on his museum. This guy has made baptismal fonts for a lot of the cathedrals, crucifixes and domes. He actually did the one up in Assisi after the earthquake, and he's just a remarkable man. And in his museum, he has a picture with the Pope, and everybody says, "Who's that guy with Cesare?" But the reason I never wanted to buy these, I'm so scared to use the damn thing, you know? I mean, it's a piece of art. The copper is 100% copper, and this is all one piece. So he bangs this all out, okay? And then the inside is Bolivian tin. And he lines it with the tin because this is the heat retention. When you put this on, especially on a gas stove, this really retains the heat. And he explains to me today, you know, how much the tin costs because he brings it in from Bolivia. And then you'll see this when you'll see that he did it. He puts his little logo on the bottom, but the handle is all brass. Okay, and it's actually what he calls cold riveted to the pan, and then he makes the top. And this is a piece of art, you know, for me. But I promised Cesare, because when I got it, and I got it this August, I told him I would use it for the holidays. So I keep pushing back the holidays. But definitely for Christmas, I'm going to use this. But this one here will be a real exercise. But you can see, and you can see in this book, the art and craftsmanship. It would take him approximately 3 days, what he calls good days, because he's 88. He's probably in better shape than I am. 3 days to make this for the pan. And the top is a little different. He says this, to make a good top, is about a day. So that's 4 days' work. So I have no problem paying Cesare exactly what he wants. And when you go in a supermarket and you look for a real copper one in the United States, they're really hard to find. And so I got to test it and then you know, have a party. But be careful, because that weighs a chunk. Okay. All right. So. Let me go a little more on the pasta, okay? So in Italy, different regions, much like have dialects for languages, like both my in-laws and outlaws, as I call them, are Calabres and Pugliese, which are way down the southern region. And we kind of gravitated to Tuscany. But so they all have different languages, they all make different pasta sauces or gravy. That's where the difference comes from. And I've learned over the years, there's no good or no bad pasta sauce. It's all got to be good. And I've seen over the last 20 years how people actually, you know, incorporate everything, vegetables and you know, seafood. Of course, we all know, but everybody attaches something to the pasta. So that's where that pan comes in handy. In Tuscany. And this is a really bad example, but I'm going to pass it around because everybody thinks we're crazy. We come back to the States and we can never find pisce. Any of you ever heard of pisce? Well, we went to the Culinary. There's a restaurant in New York City that actually, you can't buy it to take out, but they have it there. So it's a spaghetti. And God, don't ask me how they do it, but there's a hole through the middle. But when it cooks, it's absolutely delicious. And in Tuscany, there's two sauces that they make with them. One is a Cinghiali sauce. The Cinghiali is wild boar, so that's absolutely delicious. And then something that you won't see outside of Tuscany is they make it with breadcrumbs and olive oil. And it goes back to having it stick to it. So this poor thing has been demonstrated all over the Northeast, and they're pretty beat up. But take a look at, that's our pisce. So,
Do you know how to get the hole in it?
you know what? It's actually, I'm going to tell you in a minute. Okay, I don't want to teach you too much because then you'll be smarter than my grandmother. But anyway, So, next to this town we live in, Trequarnez, which is about 400 people, there's another town called Sinaloa. And in Sinaloa, these two sisters own a pasta shop. And part of the Lombardy tour is you have to go to the pasta shop. And all the Americans said, what the hell, we gotta go to the pasta shop, you go over to this store, they got every kind of pasta in the world. So my brother, who's a wise guy, he's a little younger than I am, and my son came over a couple years ago. So the first place I took them to the pasta shop, because in Italy, the hours are strange. They close at 2, and then open back up at 5. And if you want pasta for that night, you better get there before 2, or you're not going to eat until after 6. So my brother goes in, and the two ladies, I call them girls, but now they're really ladies because we've been going there for so long. He says to them, and his Italian's not too good, and he says, you know, what makes it fresh? So they grab him by the ear and bring him in the back. And so that day we were buying raviolis, because their raviolis like out of this world. It's worth the trip over. Okay? But they have all the dough made, and then you determine what you want to buy, and they make it fresh. So the pishi, in answer to your question, they roll it by hand. But they use a thin spaghetti, like an angel hair pasta, and lay it down and roll it in that and cut it in sections. Okay, so that's how they make it. So pishi, and then if you have it with chingali sauce, which is wild boar, or the breadcrumbs, and and the olive oil, it's just out of this world. In Montepulciano, there's a lady, Marcella. She's about 80 years old. She's probably one of the best pasta makers in the world. So this year, we went over, every year we go see her. You have to eat at her place. You eat in her house. You eat in her dining room. On Wednesday, she has all the clergy in Montepulciano come for lunch, and she cooks. And I love it, okay? And every year we go and see her, and we've been going for 20 years. It's 10 euros a head, no matter what you eat. Okay, and I'm telling you, she puts out a feast, and sometimes we don't get past the pasta. So what we do is, when we get to Montepulciano and you walk up the hill around, we always catch her before she takes her break. And she'll say, well, what do you want to eat tonight? Okay, what pastas you want to make? So we always get the pishi. And then she makes an unbelievable gnocchi, which is just out of this world. And then this year we got the tagliatelle. Now this is all before the pork and the chicken and the beef, okay? And then after that, you have to have the desserts, and then you have the cookies and all of that. But we've been going there for 21 years, and she's just amazing, and it's just a cultural experience. I mean, when you're sitting in the place, you think you're in the 60s, the pink tablecloths, and it's just her and one waitress. She's had the same waitress for the 20 years we've been there. So that's my two stories, okay? One of the things that I have to tell you, growing up in Italian, and it goes back very much like all our other cultural traditions, Sunday was the most important day. At 1 o'clock we had dinner. I had a couple brothers who had a hard time telling time. They didn't eat. Okay? Everybody had to be there at 1 o'clock, and that was it. Okay? And then when I married a non-Italian, they couldn't understand, like on Thanksgiving, like you had your antipasta, you had soup, you had your pasta, and then you had the turkey for dessert. And then later on, you would go back and have the real dessert. So, my fondest memories are Christmas Eve. In the Italian tradition, they have what's called the 5-fish dinner, and you have to make 5 separate fish, and then you make probably 3 of those dishes with pasta. But it was amazing because on Christmas Eve, the 5-fish dinner lasted 3 to 4 hours. My brother came up with this thing: 5 fishes, 4 pasta, 3 wines, and it just kept going. But then everybody would pass out and hopefully get up in time to go to midnight mass. So I think food in our culture, Italian culture, is very important. Every family celebration, whether it's a christening, a wedding, even funerals, okay, and birthdays, it's all about the food, okay? and I know you're gonna get up and talk a little bit about Ireland, but we always joke, when they bring, the Italians worry about having enough food, the Irish worry about having enough booze. So at our wedding reception, they gave us 2 bills, one for the food, one for the booze. Okay? So you could probably figure out which was higher. But, all right, but so that's a separate check thing. There's a whole language. Okay, I think one of the most important things about learning Italian, and I'm surely still not good at it, but when you go to Italy and you sit down, whoever your host is, they want to make sure that it's a pleasurable experience for you. And you can see them talking the whole time. And the first question out of everybody's mouth is quando? When's it going to be ready? What time are we going to eat? And in my family, it was 1 o'clock, the pasta was ready. So if they invite you for dinner at 6 o'clock, plan on being there for about 3 hours and not getting to the pasta till about 7 or 7:30. So that was the first thing. The second thing is, as you're eating, great expression, is tutto bene? Is everything okay? Is everything? I'm afraid to say no. What are you going to say? You know what I mean? So that's it. And then the last thing, and you can use this when you go out to your Italian restaurants, it's kind of a symbol of perfect. It's like this. So if you ever see Italian go like this, right? That means, boy, that was delicious. That was good. That was worth the trip. You go show that. So they're really good at sign language. With your pasta, you have to have wine. And in Italy, and I could go on and on about the wine, because Montepulciano is like the wine capital, and Montalcino is right next to it, where they make the Brunello. But in Italy, you buy a big bottle or a pitcher of table wine that's $5. And it's just as good as anything you can buy around here for a lot more. The price does not give you a direct indication of the quality of the wine, and we should remember that. I think that's one of the things that I learned going to Italy. Because, over here the guy would say, oh, it's a $25 bottle of wine. So what? It's like, over in Italy, it's amazing. You just go and say, I want the house wine. And they drink more red than they do white. White, they drink a frizzati at lunchtime. This year we had a dinner for about 12 people in a winery. And it was 20 euros a head for the soup to nuts. And we got in and we're in a winery, sitting in a winery. And they bring out the wine and it's a rosé. And I'm going, something's not right here. I never had a rosé in Italy. But now the Italians are using a special grape, it's not a blend, to make a really nice, they call it a Tuscan rosé, absolutely out of this world. So that was an experience. After you get past the water in Italy is gasso or senza gasso. So it means sparkling or just regular, or frizzante. So we always start out, because our family can't agree on anything, with one, con, grasso, and the other one, senza, because my wife likes it without the gas. And that's all you really want to drink. When you're finished, okay, you have to go and have an espresso. And their espresso will knock your socks off, all right? And then the weak espresso will probably knock 2 pairs of socks off. But we take the chicken or American way out. We do the cappuccino because it's kind of cut a little bit. But after you do that, and then you have your cookies and baked goods, and then you have vinsanto. Does anybody know what vinsanto is? It's a after dinner cordial, and you dip the cookies in it. And my brother doesn't drink, but he intakes vinsanto. But if you take the biscotti and put them in there, in Italy we go to the bakery and they have what's called the bones. And after they make the real nice biscotti to package and send home with you, the bones are all the pieces. So you do that and you dip that in the Visconti, and then you don't have to worry about tomorrow morning. So when all of that is done and you're ready to go take a nap, okay, you do a passeggiato. Does anybody know what a passeggiato is? In Italy, after their big meal, they all go for a walk. And in Italy, it's 99% uphill. It's the only country in the world where you never come down. It's amazing. And every morning when we were in Italy, my wife, my brother, all the rest of my family goes running. And I could just about walk because it's like this. So I'm walking up the hill and saying, I'm not gonna make it, but I'm dreaming of the cappuccino that's gonna be at the cafe when I get out there. And there are these 93, 4, and 5-year-old ladies, okay, with their cane, going up that hill like there's nothing to do. And I said, if I can't get my big butt up that hill, I'm not quite there. I said, there's something wrong with me. But that's part of their ritual, the passeggiato, after they eat. A couple other things I want to share with you, and then we need to get on to the Irish and then get on to something to eat. But I think one of the things that I really learned in the particular region that we go to is the importance of olive oil. And that's a big thing. So in Italy, in the Tuscany region, 12 or 13 farms are all part of a comune. So they go out and they do the olives at the same time and press them at the same time. And the farmers get paid by the pound. And then once the yield is made, they divide up the money that comes from that. This year, this summer, it was terrible. It was hot as Hades, and there was no rain for days and days and days. And the olives had a really bad year. So what they do in the particular region that we are, the comune that we're in, Trequarnda, is they actually put nets on the bottom of the trees. So when the olives fall, they don't hit the ground and get bruised. So I love olive oil. We go around tasting it. Have to sneak it back into the States, but it's really worth the trip. And then I think one of the other things that you really learn about the Italian cultures or all other cultures is that we're all willing to share our cultures. And the best place to share our cultures is over a meal. I think when you sit down and you break it out and you do that, I think you have a better understanding of who you are, where you came from, and really what you do. And then my wife gave me this whole list of Italian sayings, but I'm not even going to go there. My favorite saying, which I never realized I was wrong until I was about 10 or 11 years old. Anybody have any idea? This little piggy went to the market. This little piggy stayed home. My little piggy had spaghetti and meatballs. The other piglet had none, cried wee wee wee. And when I told my wife that the first time, she thought I just made that up. And I said, I learned that. I'm not that smart. I didn't know that. So, you know, when I think about it, growing up in Italian culture, growing up in a two-language base, having the opportunity to be in a community where it didn't matter. I went Jewish, Afro-American, Polish. There was a Polish community right up the street that I learned a lot about, the Italians. And then Sunday was an amazing day. And, you know, you talked about it, and, you know, Jeff talked about it. And Sunday was an amazing day in Poughkeepsie because when I was a kid, what happened in Poughkeepsie on Sunday? The dayliner came. So there would be this influx of people up at Main Street. And you had all kinds of culture. The dayliner, I wish it would come back, was a marvelous thing. Absolutely fantastic, you know, and it would stop over here. So when I was young, we always went down 9W to Poughkeepsie, because we lived downtown in Poughkeepsie and we were there. As I got older, my parents built a house up near Hyde Park, and we came across the Kingston Rhinecliff Bridge. Before it was the bridge, there was a ferry. Anyone remember the Kingston Rhinecliff Ferry? It was 25 cents, and you came out right downtown, right?
Ferry slips right there.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, that was an experience. So I'll go back to the piggies. My time is done. Thank you, and a great opportunity to speak to you.
Les, thanks a lot. That was really great. And I can see by the smiles that a lot of people were feeling the same way. It's now I know when I first talked to Sean, and this is the first time that I've met him too. He said that food was not such a big thing in the Irish household. So I'm can't wait to hear
from this.
Yes, I grew up in an Irish-speaking and an English-speaking house, so I hear these themes of bilingualism, and yeah, that's, so, just listening to everyone, it's, I was gonna talk for 15 minutes, and I have something just for that. Can you hear me without the microphone as well? Okay. My mother, her name is Bridget, or Bridie, she passed away a few years ago, and here she is. My mother came from County Donegal in the northwest of Ireland, in the province of Ulster. And she came and settled here in the county of Ulster, Ulster County. My father came from a place called Staten Island, or Richmond County. So Mom was from County Donegal and Daddy was from County Richmond. But they found and made a home here for us. I have two older brothers here in Kingston, New York. And we were all born here in Kingston at the Benedictine Hospital on Mary's Avenue. And our house was right down the hill from Mary's Avenue on a street called Andrew Street. And if you ever had Ford's book, Streetwise, and you turn to the page for Andrew Street, lo and behold, there's 78 Andrew Street. This is the house we grew up in, Andrew Street. And I moved out of there just 4 years ago. And I moved so far away, I moved to a place called West Chestnut Street. I can't get out of the neighborhood, you know, I'm still here. So I'm going to pass this around. If you lose the place, just go to where it says Andrew Street and you'll find it. Mom used to have like little timers, but she rarely used these things, you know, because Mom had a built-in timing mechanism. She rarely burned anything or overcooked anything in pasta. Al dente. So I get, where do I put 50 years or more of into 15 minutes? So I was going to set the timer, and this one doesn't really work. By the way, Mom found this little leprechaun hat and stuck it on her. He really has a chef's hat. And Mom, being Mom, she said, you know, he kind of looks like Saddam Hussein. So she kind of made it a little Irish. But I do have this timer, and let's see, I'm going to really stick to the rule here, folks. 15 minutes, so let's see how we do, okay? And let's see. And when this dings, we're done, okay? All right. So Jeff calls me up last week and said, oh, Irish food. And everyone's, okay, soda bread, right? St. Patrick's Day, the whole month of March, soda bread. My mother made one of the greatest soda breads ever. Now, mind you, my mother comes from Donegal, Ireland, where there's all this kind of tradition. My mom got the best soda bread recipe from the pages of the Daily Freeman. She clipped it out in like 1968 or 69, 70, put it in her cookbook, and basically kind of improvised on what was suggested in the Daily Freeman, how to make Irish soda bread. Mom put in like the whole box, then another box of raisins, for example. And we as kids, we hated the caraway seeds, so we pleaded, no more caraway seeds. This is how food comes about. We don't follow a script. We're just doing, you know? We kind of just do it. I consider myself a decent cook. I never took a cooking lesson, but was just hanging around the kitchen watching Mom. Mom never said, okay, now Sean, this is how we're going to, you know, slice and dice, and this is, no, just watch, you absorb it, right? Kind of like, you know, when the pasta's too done, it's too done, but you want it just al dente. So everything kind of comes just right with timing. And, so I'm kind of like going through all kinds of themes that have been brought up throughout the evening. And I wrote down some notes on the back of an envelope, right? So what just struck me was what I was going to talk about. Some of the stuff got hit on, but right off the bat, I have written, there were 3 days in the week that I really associate in our family. So I can't talk about every Irish family and the experience of growing up in Ulster County, Kingston, so I can really talk about our little home on Andrew Street. But the 3 days that come up, Sundays. Boy, we talked about keeping the Sabbath, right? Or on Sunday becomes, and I'm just like, wow, right up the hill here is where I went to church at St. Mary's, where I went to school, St. Peter's. Oh, actually, I went to church at St. Peter's too. And they combined the two schools and they called it Kingston Catholic School. So I went to St. Peter's for grades 1 through 4 and St. Mary's grades 5 through 8, almost 8. Then I went to MJM, which they tore down. And all this stuff is connected. Where I grew up on Andrew Street, look out the window and there's MJM School. Things, that, it's the flood of time and we go back and forth and where, but for me, it's basically here in Kingston, New York. Now, my mom was the only one of her family to leave Donegal, and she came to this country in 1950, still a teenager. And I'm all over the kind of like, the Irish history is not a straight line, it's a circuitous thing, it's a line, it gets around somewhere, so Irish art is more circular than straight on. But so let's start with Sunday, and again, the faith. Walking around with rosary beads in my pocket, that's who I am. Irish, how would we describe? We were Catholic, American, Irish. And some of us were Yankees fans or Mets fans, and all that other stuff, right? That comes with the whole deal. All right, but Sunday, we delivered the Daily Freeman, so we got up early and put the papers out. My brothers had 2 paper routes, and I had inherited their routes. So, and Dad was good to us because the Sunday Freeman was heavier. So Dad, we'd load up all the papers in the car and go around. And before we got home, we stopped at not the Reher Bakery. By then it was kind of, when did the Reher Bakery go out? The 70s? Yeah. But we went to what was then called Ketterer's Bakery, which is now Dysing's Bakery on the corner of Cornell and Broadway. And wow, just a Jewish kosher roll that when we brought them home, a dozen or more, we had bacon and pork sausages and scrambles and sunny sides, and that was our Irish American breakfast, you know, with and plenty of butter. The Irish didn't invent butter, but man, you know, we have olive oil is like the grease of the Mediterranean, right? Butter in Northern Europe. I don't know if it slows us down or what, but it's, and so that's Sunday. So we start the week with Sunday. We move on to Wednesday because my brothers and I, we went to Kingston Catholic School. We had half a day session on Wednesdays because the public school kids came in for their religious instruction in the afternoon. What a deal! So we get to go home early. And this is my mom just kind of improvising what it's like to be an American with all these different cultures. My mom got this idea, and one Wednesday afternoon when we got home, she had cut English muffins and put some sauce on them and some mozzarella and stuck it in the oven. And we had little English muffin pizzas. And is that kind of American, right? And that was our Wednesday afternoon tradition. Got out of school early. Mom had the English muffin pizzas. Hey, happy. But, you know, get out of your school uniform. And Mom didn't say put on your play clothes. Put on your work clothes. Play clothes. We had play clothes too. We had chores to do. Do kids get chores to do anymore? I know. I don't want to sound, but and that was Wednesday. Then I remember again Wednesday we watched some TV. Remember Wednesday was Prince Spaghetti Day. My mom comes to this country. What did she know from pasta and sauce or gravy? But when she moved in, my parents moved up from the city when they got married in 1961. And they moved into an apartment on Miller's Lane uptown off of, what street is that? Lucas Avenue? Lucas, right? And you know, the next door neighbor was, her name was Fran, and Fran still lives in Sargis. Fran is the daughter of an immigrant father and mother from Sicily. And Fran teaches my mom how to make the best pot of sauce known to, Sicily, I guess, right? And cheated a little bit, got the cans of sauce, the can of puree, the can of paste, but learned how to doctor it up with some sugar. And Mama's in there with onions and garlic, and that was kind of like that's why Mom had the sauce, by the way, for the English muffin pizzas, right? Because Mom also made an Irish stew. We loved her sauce better. Oh, Mom's making stew. But Mom's making sauce? Yeah, That's growing up Irish, American, Catholic here in Kingston, New York. Which brings us then to Saturday. I'm skipping through the weeks. Fridays, we're Catholic, so we ate fish on Fridays. So, what was the fish market over here on Dock Street? State Fish, right? We went down to State Fish and got our fish, and then brought it home, and Mom fried it up, and mostly fried. We fried stuff. Tradition, right? Baked. But I don't want to give the impression that the Irish are bad cooks. They got stuck with that, but my mom was a wonderful cook. But it was kind of simple food, but the main course served in an Irish home or in our own was not the food, was the company. The hospitality, you're so welcome. Which, the thing that marks a truly Irish home is when you go in on the stove is always the tea kettle. And the kettle is always on the simmer, right? So when a guest comes in, well, Mom had bigger ones, but the little teapot, right? You had a pot of tea, we drank tea galore. Galore actually comes from the Irish, meaning aplenty. So always tea, and other pastries from Dysings, or when it became Dysings before it was. So we always had stuff like that. And there's diabetes in the family too. That's another story. Saturdays. My last name is Waltman, German. So there's sort of that, but so right over here on the bottom of Wirt Street, before you hit the bridge, was Bruckholt's Market. And Walter Bruckholtz and his father's name Walter as well, they made the best, German knockwursts, but they made really good wheat with their hot dogs. So Saturday was to go down to Bruckholtz for the wursts and the hot dogs. And the sauerkraut too, the imported German sauerkraut. Again, my mom didn't know any of this food, but it became our food, because that's the way Mom liked it. And what Mom liked, guess what, we liked too, except for her stew. However, tastes change with age, and I can only have Mom's stew again. If I could only have Mom's Soderbrand, because the recipe she clipped out of the Freeman was the best. That's, I'm so proud. And then Sunday, we went to Mass. We remember to keep holy the Lord's Day, right? We went to Mass, and we were altar boys, and we had all our duties. And sometimes if we got a treat because the noon 1 o'clock meal was on the table. We met all the other days of the week. We ate 6 o'clock-ish when Dad got home from work. But Sunday meal, midday, or 1 o'clock. And then, at 1 o'clock, football too, right? So such an American Irish house, whatever that even means. My mom's family, all my aunts, uncles, cousins on that side of the family are still pretty much up in County Donegal, Ireland. Mom and Dad was saving up, every third year or so that we would spend the whole long summer living at Granny's house. And just experiencing that too, and just like talking about the differences between food in Italy as opposed to Italian American, but there's those connections of what can and cannot be done. Chef Boyardee in a can, it was allowed in our house, but it was kind of frowned upon too, because that was kind of lazy, because Mom knew how to make a good sauce. Dad, on the other hand, Dad, when the microwave was, that's how Dad kind of learned how to cook. That Dad was good at nuking things or zapping things. God, you know. And so we talked about what does food mean. Well, food was good, and because that's what kept us good. But in an Irish household, it was what happened around the table besides the food. It was the conversations and the stories, and the neighbors who were, or the family, the relatives who came in. Some announced, some not announced, but teapot was always around, so we could make some more tea. So I could also turn this into, because I grew up bilingually, a little mini Irish language lesson, if you don't mind, all right? So, and then some of this, like some of these words might come right to you because they're not too obscure. But we had in Irish, we call it the table, an tabla, right? And one of the things that the Irish really love, you might have heard this word, conch, talk, conversation. That was really the main meal served in an Irish house. Was conch, conversation, talk. But this is how times changed. One of the things we learned also was crack. Now, not the crack that became a drug problem, but crack. The Irish word, the Gaelic word crack, meaning fun or good times. That was so savored or appreciated. A good story, a good recitation, a way of like so-and-so could just phrase something. That was a good crack. Yes?
Would that be crack me up? Like, oh, you just cracked me up?
I wonder if that could come from that. That's possible, right? Sometimes you'll see this word, instead of C-R-A-I-C, crack, it'll be C-R-A-C-K on crack. Could very well be. It's time, right? Al dente. But one of the things we were taught was munu, or manners. And as kids, it was understood that kids are to be seen and not heard, right? And I don't know if that's disappearing too. But one of the things, remember the word tabla? So Mom would say to us, na be a conch, a tabla. And here, my three brothers and I, don't be talking at the table. Because that was an adult time.
Right.
It was, this is Uncle Joe, Uncle Harry, they were there. Now, if Uncle Joe or Uncle Harry or Aunt Maria addressed you, oh yes, you could say, oh, I'm in 6th grade, and Sister Celia is my principal, and da. And then you shut it, because it was back to adult conversation, right? And then guess what? Go out, kids, go play. Oh, kids were allowed to play unsupervised. Imagine that. Remember, Anthony, Sean, Brian, Harry, those were my supper time. Okay, coming. Right? But you always kind of knew that because Mom had the built-in timer that she was calling you early. You had 10 or 15 minutes tops to get in, get washed up, get to the table, and there you go. So na be a conch again tabla, yeah. And when Mom and Dad were talking serious matters, your opinion matters what? You pay what bill? Quick little words, and tefata, like the teapot. And tefata. Right? My mother and I spoke a lot of Irish Gaelic together. My two older brothers never really learned the language. My father, being from Staten Island, didn't know any of it, but my dad just loved us, right? And you talked about the importance of family, holding it all together, and houses of worship. This is a common theme we heard tonight. I wasn't expecting to hear Dad. Wow, man, we got that. And so with that came all that respect, knowing one's place and how to enjoy life too, crack. And I'll finish off with this. My parents were both teetotalers. They were Irish, they were called the pioneers. They took the pledge. So at their confirmation age, they pledged to never let alcohol pass their lips. But, however, this is the hospitality that Mom had. She knew that there were friends and cousins and relatives who'd like to have a drop of the crater. So we had an bojo. And it wasn't usually, it was usually whiskey, right? We very rarely had wine in the house, but if there was alcohol in the house, it was ambucha, a little whiskey, a little, you know. No one was supposed to get drunk in our house, supposed to. And so then we also had anpenta. Some people would have a beer, right, a pint. And basically that was it. There was like a tolerance of, okay, so-and-so does drink, that doesn't mean we're not gonna allow them to drink. It's just, there was like a built-in, you knew the rules, but you knew, okay, well, we're all human too, and we're just here to enjoy one another's company, and food helps that along. But Amina Maiga, thank you very much.